There is a number so large that most species in the galaxy have no word for it. 700,000 years. That is how long the Vorthani Dominion has ruled. Not governed, not guided. Ruled, with iron, with fear, with a kind of ancient, patient cruelty that only a civilization with millennia to spare can truly perfect. 700,000 years of conquest. 700,000 years of subjugation. 43,000 species catalogued, collared, and converted into fuel for an empire so vast that its outermost territories have never once seen the face of their own masters. The Vorthani do not bother. When you have always won, you stop showing up in person. They are not monsters in the way children imagine monsters, fanged and howling. They are worse. They are bureaucrats of annihilation. They have a form they file when they erase a civilization. A checklist. Column A. Cultural assets worth preserving for Dominion archives. Column B. Biological material suitable for labor conversion. Column C. Everything else. Column C is always the longest column. The day they first detected humanity, a Vorthani analyst named Sorveth Ka, a creature of pale, translucent flesh and 6 methodical fingers, reviewed the intake report on the species designated Terran Class 7 and made a notation in the margin of the file. The notation read, "Unremarkable. Schedule for standard absorption. No priority flag required." He filed it. He moved on. He had 47 other species to process that quarter. That notation, those 4 words, would be studied by historians for the next 10,000 years. Because here is what Sorveth Ka did not understand, could not understand, because nothing in 700,000 years of conquest had ever taught the Vorthani to watch for it. Humanity does not fold. Other species, when faced with the Vorthani Dominion, go through predictable stages. There is the denial stage, which lasts about a decade. Then the resistance stage, which lasts a generation and ends in fire. Then the submission stage, which lasts forever. Every species in the galaxy follows this pattern. The Vorthani built their entire governance model around it. They have entire administrative divisions devoted to managing the transition from Stage 2 to Stage 3. It is routine. It is expected. It is as natural to them as gravity. Humanity got to Stage 2. And then something broke in the pattern. The Vorthani sent their first fleet to Earth's solar system 412 years ago. Standard deployment. 300 warships. Enough to sterilize a planet and still have ships left over to collect the ashes. Their commander, a 500-year-old military strategist named Draveth the Patient, transmitted the standard surrender demand. He had transmitted the same message to 61 worlds. All 61 had eventually complied. Earth's response arrived 11 minutes later. It was not a surrender, it was a declaration. 47 words. The transmission was signed not by a head of state, not by a supreme commander, not by any of the titles the Vorthani expected. It was signed by a joint session of every nation on Earth, every government, every faction, entities that had spent the previous 3 centuries fighting each other over borders and resources and ideology. They had signed together. The declaration read, in part, "We have reviewed your terms. We decline. We further advise that any ship entering within 500,000 kilometers of Earth's moon will be treated as a hostile incursion and met with maximum force. We are aware that your fleet outnumbers our current defensive capacity by a ratio of approximately 30 to 1. We want you to know that this does not concern us. We have been in worse situations. We are not built for surrender. Come if you're coming." Draveth the Patient read this message 3 times. Then he ordered the attack. He expected it to last 6 hours. It lasted 11 months. When it was over, when the Vorthani finally cracked Earth's orbital defenses through sheer attrition, when they finally began their planetary assault, when they finally installed their administrative apparatus and processed humanity into the Dominion's labor systems, Draveth the Patient filed his after-action report. In the section marked Anomalies Noted, he wrote 7 words. These ones will be a problem later. He was right. He just did not understand how catastrophically, universe-alteringly, irrevocably right he was. Because the Vorthani made one mistake. One, In 700,000 years of flawless imperial management, they made a single error in judgment. They let humanity live. The Vorthani system of control is elegant in the way a steel trap is elegant, simple, effective, inevitable. They do not rule through terror alone. Terror is inefficient, it breeds martyrs, it wastes labor. They rule through dependency. Within a generation of conquest, every absorbed species is structurally incapable of surviving without the Dominion's supply chains. Their food systems are reconfigured. Their energy infrastructure is replaced with Vorthani standard grid systems that require Vorthani-controlled fuel cells. Their medicine is updated to new Vorthani-formulated compounds that only Dominion pharmacies can produce. You cannot rebel against the Vorthani without first solving the problem of how your children will eat next Tuesday. It worked on 43,000 species. With humans, it almost worked. Almost. The Vorthani administrator assigned to Earth, a senior bureaucrat named Zell Mora, patient and meticulous and utterly without malice in the way that made her more terrifying than any monster, spent her first 40 years in office slowly, systematically, professionally converting Earth and its colonies into a standard Dominion dependency zone. She was good at her job. She was very, very good at her job. What she did not account for was what was happening in the spaces she could not see. Humans are, by nature, a species that does not simply give up. They have a word for it, stubborn, that they use as an insult, but it has always been their greatest weapon. They are stubborn in the way tectonic plates are stubborn, slow, invisible, and then suddenly, catastrophically, you have a mountain where there was not one before. 3 years after the Vorthani occupation began, in a decommissioned water treatment facility beneath what had been Denver, Colorado, a woman named Commander Reyes gathered 11 other people around a folding table and started a list. The list was titled, What We Need. Item 1, an unmonitored communication network. Item 2, access to Vorthani engineering specifications. Item 3, 10 years. Commander Reyes had been a Marine before the occupation. She had also been an aerospace engineer. She had also, in a previous life, been the kind of woman who fixed her own car engine by reading manuals in the dark and refused to call for help until she had exhausted every other option. She had 8 kids, all of them furious, all of them useful. She folded the list, put it in her pocket, and said to the 11 people around the table, "We're going to study them until we understand them better than they understand themselves. And then we're going to use that understanding to take everything back." Someone at the table asked, "How long will that take?" Commander Reyes was quiet for a moment. "Long," she said. "But we've got time." She did not know then how long it would actually take. None of them did. None of them would live to see it. But that is the thing about humans that the Vorthani never modeled, never predicted, never truly grasped even after 4 centuries of careful study. Humans plan across generations, not just in the abstract, the way other species gesture toward legacy. Humans sit down with their children and their grandchildren and they say, "Here is what we are building. Here is what you will carry forward. Here is your part of the plan." They do this because they have always known they are temporary. Every human being has always known they will die. And rather than making them fatalistic, it made them forward-thinking in a way no long-lived species ever truly masters. The Vorthani, who can live for 3,000 years, think in centuries. They found this adequate. Humans think in centuries too, but they feel the urgency of it. They feel every year. The resistance network built by Commander Reyes and her 11 people became, over the next 4 decades, a shadow civilization. It spread through the labor camps and the administrative zones, and the deep mining operations on Mars, and the agricultural domes of Europa. It spread through coded messages in food distribution manifests and pattern signals in the maintenance logs of Vorthani water purification systems. It spread through children who grew up with 2 educations, the one the Vorthani provided, which was functional and deliberately narrow, and the one their parents gave them in whispered hours, which was everything else. The Vorthani conducted 14 major purges over the first century of occupation. Each time they believed they had dismantled the network. Each time they were wrong. The network was not a thing that could be dismantled, because it was not a thing. It was an idea. It was the idea that this was temporary, that it would end. that the ending was already being built by human hands in the dark. By the second century of occupation, the Resistance had something extraordinary. They had Vorthani engineers who had defected. Not many. The Vorthani are not a species prone to conscience, but the Dominion is vast, and vast things develop cracks, and in the cracks live the dissatisfied, the idealistic, the ones who looked at the administrative records for 700,000 years of conquest and felt, somewhere in their alien chest, something that was not quite pride. A Vorthani engineer named Quelith Voss made contact with a resistance cell in what had been Houston in the year 2289. He was 211 years old. He had spent 40 of those years processing the paperwork for resource extraction operations on subjugated worlds. He had seen the numbers. He told the resistance cell, "I can give you the technical specifications for Vorthani FTL drive systems. I can give you the structural weaknesses in Dominion warship hull architecture. I can give you the exact electromagnetic frequency that overloads a Vorthani command and control relay node." He paused. "But there is one thing I need you to understand." The resistance leader at the time, a third-generation fighter named Marcus Okafor, Commander Reyes's great-great-grandson, leaned forward. "What?" he asked. "The reason I am giving you this," Quelith Voss said, "is not because I believe you can win. It is because I have studied you for 40 years, and I have concluded that if anyone in this galaxy is going to end this, it is you. Not because you are stronger, not because you are smarter, but because you are the only species I have ever encountered that cannot be made to stop caring about something just because it is difficult." Marcus Okafor was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he asked. "For what?" "Until we can actually fight back. How long do we need?" Quelith Voss thought about it. He was, by nature, a very precise man. "If everything goes correctly," he said, "approximately 200 more years." Marcus Okafor did not react the way the Vorthani engineer expected. He did not despair. He did not rage. He picked up a pen, pulled out a notebook, and said, "Okay, walk me through the timeline. There is a place in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, in a cluster of unremarkable carbonaceous rocks, that the Vorthani Geological Survey categorized as resource insufficient and left alone, where something extraordinary was built. It took 187 years to build. It was built in pieces, small enough that any individual component could be explained as routine mining equipment or salvage operations. It was built by workers who were 3, 4, 5 generations removed from the people who designed it, who were working from plans passed down through families the way other families pass down recipes or stories. It was built by hands that would never see it finished, by people who spent their lives adding to something whose full shape they would never witness. The Vorthani scanned that asteroid cluster 43 times over the course of those 187 years. They saw mining operations. They saw maintenance crews. They saw the ordinary, unremarkable evidence of a conquered species doing its assigned labor. They did not see what was inside the asteroids. No one who has not grown up understanding the particular genius of human concealment would understand how it was done. It was done the way the resistance network was done, the way all human things are done in captivity, layer by layer, patient as stone, hiding in plain sight. The outer rock of each asteroid was real asteroid, scanned clean. Inside, carved out over decades of work disguised as routine excavation, was something else. Shipyards, not small ones. The largest hidden shipyard in human history occupied the hollowed interior of a carbonaceous asteroid, 3 kilometers in diameter. At its peak, it employed 12,000 workers. It was powered by a geothermal tap so precisely engineered that its energy signature was completely masked by the natural heat of the surrounding rock. Its air recyclers were built from components individually requisitioned from 17 different Vorthani administrative zones, each part small enough to be logged as routine replacement equipment, assembled in secret by engineers who had memorized the specs because writing them down was too dangerous. The ships they built were different from anything the Vorthani had faced in 700,000 years of warfare. They had to be. The Resistance had spent 2 centuries studying Vorthani technology. Not to copy it, they did not have the resources to copy it at scale, and copying it would have produced inferior versions of weapons the Vorthani were already expert at defending against. They studied it to understand its assumptions. Every technology reflects the assumptions of the people who built it. Vorthani weapons technology was optimized for a specific kind of warfare: overwhelming numerical superiority, long-range bombardment, the reduction of enemy infrastructure before any direct engagement. The Vorthani had never needed to innovate past this, because it always worked. It worked for 700,000 years. They were very good at the kind of war they knew how to fight, so humans built weapons for a different kind of war. Quel'Thas had given them the starting point, the specific electromagnetic frequency that overloaded a Vorthani command and control relay node. Over 2 centuries, a succession of engineers had built on that starting point like jazz musicians building on a chord progression, each generation finding something new in it. What they eventually produced was a weapon so conceptually alien to Vorthani military doctrine that the Dominion's defense systems were architecturally incapable of recognizing it as a weapon at all. The humans called it the Cascade Pulse. It was not a gun. It was not a missile. It was not a beam weapon or a kinetic impactor or any of the ordnance categories that the Vorthani's threat assessment systems were designed to flag. It was a signal, a precisely tuned, hideously amplified version of the frequency Quel'Thas had identified, packaged into a transmission that could be broadcast from a single ship and propagate through subspace in a sphere with a radius of approximately 4 light minutes. Inside that sphere, every Vorthani command and control relay node, the crystalline processors that formed the neural network of every Vorthani warship, every Vorthani military installation, every Vorthani automated defense grid, would experience a cascading failure that took approximately 9 seconds to complete. 9 seconds in which every Vorthani weapon system went offline. 9 seconds in which the most powerful military force in galactic history was, in a very specific and absolute sense, helpless. 9 seconds is enough time. Ask any soldier. 9 seconds is a very, very long time. The resistance leaders who saw the weapon's first test, conducted in secret on a single salvaged Vorthani relay node in the deepest chamber of the asteroid shipyard, were quiet for a long time afterward. Then a woman named Admiral Yusra Chen, the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Commander Reyes, who had inherited not just her ancestors' rank but her ancestors' particular quality of dangerous calm, said, "How many ships do we need for this to work on the full fleet?" Her chief weapons engineer, a man named Dr. Alvarez, checked his calculations 3 times before answering. To pulse the entire Vorthani military simultaneously, across all their deployment zones, with enough overlap to prevent any node from being outside the effect radius? Yes. 400 ships minimum, ideally 600. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. How many do we have? 712. The room was very quiet. Then someone in the back, a young sensor tech named Torres who had been with the fleet for 3 years and was the first person in his family to actually see the ships they'd been building, said very quietly, "Holy language," said Admiral Chen. But she was smiling. The Vorthani High Dominion Council convened its 417th Millennium Session on what the humans designated as March 14th, 2487. The council chamber was located on Vorth Prime, the capital world of the Dominion, a planet so ancient and so layered with the accumulated architecture of 700,000 years of civilization that its surface was no longer the original surface. It was the top layer of a geological record made entirely of buildings. Beneath the current city were 63 previous cities, each one built atop the ruins of the last, going down 40 kilometers into the planet's crust. The council met in a chamber that had hosted every session of the Dominion's ruling body for the past 3,000 years. The chamber's walls were covered in the species glyphs of every civilization the Dominion had absorbed. 43,000 of them. They were displayed with the same aesthetic care a collector might use to display butterflies, arranged beautifully, lit dramatically, completely, utterly dead. High Executor Veth Corral, the leader of the council, was 1,400 years old. She had been born into the Dominion's ruling class, had served in administrative roles for 800 years, had climbed through the hierarchy with the patient certainty of someone who has never had a reason to hurry. She wore the ceremonial robes of her office, which were made from a fiber that no longer existed in nature because the species that had produced it had been in Column C. She did not think about this. The agenda for the 417th Millennium Session was unremarkable. Resource allocation reviews, population census updates from the outer territories, a minor border dispute in Sector 7742, a routine status report on the Terran Administrative Zone. It was the Terran report that Zelmora's successor's successor presented. He was a young administrator named Previth Sol, only 80 years old, eager and meticulous. He had reviewed the Terran zone files thoroughly. The Terran species continues to show elevated non-compliance metrics compared to other Class 7 populations, Previth Sol reported, but labor output remains within acceptable parameters. The underground resistance network continues its multi-century persistence, but our assessment teams have determined it lacks the operational capacity to pose any meaningful strategic threat. Draveth the patient noted these ones in his original report, one of the older council members observed. She was 900 years old and had a long memory. Yes, Previth Sol agreed. A historical curiosity. They are stubborn, but not capable. We recommend continued standard monitoring. High Executor Veth Corral reviewed the summary without particular interest. Approved, she said, and moved to the next item on the agenda. Across the galaxy at that exact moment, Admiral Yusra Chen was standing on the bridge of her flagship, the UESS Prometheus, looking at a star chart. The chart showed the full deployment map of the Vorthani military. 700 years of careful intelligence gathering rendered into a single operational picture. Fleet positions, base locations, patrol routes, the full, vast, intricate nervous system of the most powerful military force in galactic history, and the places where, in approximately 14 hours, human ships would be positioned to pulse every single node of that system simultaneously. Her executive officer, Commander Diaz, came to stand beside her. "Fleet reports ready," he said. "All 712 ships are in position. All Cascade pulse arrays are calibrated and tested. All pilots have their assignments." Admiral Chen nodded. "Casualty projections?" she asked. "If everything works perfectly," Diaz said carefully, "and the pulse functions as designed, and the Vorthani don't have any technology we haven't accounted for, minimal. The 9 seconds gives us clean windows on every military target in range." "And if everything doesn't work perfectly?" Diaz was quiet for a moment. "Then we lose everything," he said. "The fleet, the bases, the resistance network, everything 4 centuries of people built." Admiral Chen looked at the star chart for a long time. She thought about Commander Reyes, sitting in a basement in Denver with 11 other people and a folding table. She thought about Marcus Okafor writing in a notebook by the light of a salvaged lamp, listening to an alien defector describe a 200-year plan. She thought about the 12,000 people who worked in the asteroid shipyards for decades building things they would never see fly. She thought about her mother and her grandmother, and the long, unbroken line of people behind her who had carried this forward across generations, so that she could stand here now, with 712 ships, and a weapon that nobody in the Dominion had ever seen coming. She thought about the 43,000 species glyphs on the wall of the Vorthani Council chamber. She had seen the intelligence photographs. "We don't lose," she said quietly, not as bravado, as fact, as the quiet, absolute, ancestral certainty of a species that had been working toward this moment for 400 years. She turned from the star chart. "All ships hold position. We move in 14 hours. At 0400 hours, ship standard time, on what the humans designated March 15, 2487, Admiral Yusra Chen broadcast a single encrypted signal to all 712 ships of the Liberation Fleet. The signal contained one word: forward. What happened next took less than a day. It is, without question, the most compressed military campaign in recorded galactic history. Historians still struggle to write about it in conventional terms, because conventional military narrative assumes a back-and-forth attack, response, counterattack, attrition. What happened on March 15, 2487, had none of that structure. It was not a battle. It was a revelation. The 712 ships of the Liberation Fleet emerged from their hidden positions simultaneously, across 17 star systems, at precisely the moment the tactical calculations determined all Vorthani fleet assets were within pulse radius. The emergence itself, 712 ships dropping out of concealed FTL transit in perfect coordination, across a volume of space that would take a conventional fleet weeks to traverse, was enough to trigger automated alerts throughout the Vorthani military network. Alarms activated on every Vorthani warship in the region. Defense grids came online. Targeting systems acquired the new contacts. Fire control officers settled into their stations with the calm efficiency of a military that had not lost a war in 700,000 years. They began the targeting sequences. The targeting sequences take 11 seconds to complete, from threat detection to weapons free. The humans had known this. They had known it for a century. It is one of the things Quelithvos told Marcus Okafor in Houston in 2289, and it had been in every operational plan ever since. The humans needed 9 seconds. 2 seconds after the Liberation Fleet emerged, every human ship fired its cascade pulse simultaneously. The pulse traveled at the speed of light, which in this context was essentially instantaneous. The distances involved were calculated so that every Vorthani asset was within the propagation sphere before the 9-second countdown began. The signal hit Vorthani relay nodes the way a power surge hits an unprotected circuit. One node failed. Then the nodes adjacent to it failed because they detected the failure and attempted to compensate, and the compensation signal contained the same frequency, amplified, passed along the network by the network's own error correction protocols. A perfect storm of engineered catastrophe. The Vorthani's own redundancy systems turned against them. The network cascade took 9 seconds. For 9 seconds, every Vorthani weapon system in 17 star systems went offline. Every targeting computer showed null. Every fire control panel was dark. Every defense grid was silent. 712 human ships were already moving. The tactical doctrine Admiral Chen had built, refined over 20 years of preparation, informed by 4 centuries of intelligence work, was not about destruction for its own sake. It was about precision. The Vorthani military ran on command structures, and command structures ran on nodes. The flagships, the command stations, the relay platforms that coordinated fleet communications. Take the nodes. Take the structure. Take the structure. Take the fleet. In 9 seconds, the Liberation Fleet was already on vector to every command node in its operational area. In the 9th second, human weapons fire was already in transit. When the Vorthani systems came back online, 9 seconds after they went dark, restored by backup protocols that functioned exactly as designed and made exactly no difference, the first thing every Vorthani commander saw was the targeting solutions already locked on them by ships that had used the darkness to close range. The first Vorthani command station took a full salvo of human kinetic penetrators at 15 seconds. It was a target the size of a small moon, surrounded by point defense systems that were extraordinarily good at stopping ordnance from enemies it had detected. It had not detected these. The station cracked along its primary structural spine. Emergency containment failed in 3 sections. The command staff, 600 Vorthani military officers, many of them centuries old, veterans of campaigns against species that had long since ceased to exist, had 3 seconds of warning before the station's power core destabilized. 3 seconds is not enough time, not even for a species that has always won. On Vorth Prime, High Executor Veth Koral was in the middle of a working dinner with 3 other council members when the first emergency alert reached her personal communication device. She looked at it with the mild irritation of someone accustomed to interruptions. Then she read it again. She read. The other council members noticed her expression, an expression no one in the room had seen on a Vorthani leader's face before, because it had not been necessary for 700,000 years. "What is it?" one of them asked. Veth Koral set down her utensil. "The Terran fleet," she said. Silence. "They have a fleet?" "Apparently." More silence. "How many ships?" Veth Koral looked at the alert again, at the numbers, at the deployment scope. at the casualty reports already beginning to come in from the outer systems. 712, she said, and something, a weapon, that our systems have no classification for. Another council member leaned forward. He was 900 years old. He had seen the file on humanity. He had been in the chamber when Praveth Saul gave his report, just yesterday. Non-compliance metrics elevated but non-threatening, the council member quoted. That was the assessment. Yesterday. Veth Koral did not reply. She was reading more of the incoming reports. Her expression had not changed, but something behind her eyes had shifted. Something fundamental, tectonic. The look of a person whose entire model of the universe has just been shown to be wrong. Get me the fleet commanders, she said. Her aide checked his device. Which ones? The aide asked. Veth Koral looked at him. All of them, she said. I'm trying, the aide said. The network is... He paused, checked again. His own expression shifted. I can't reach. Keep trying. High Executor. The aide's voice had gone very quiet. I'm showing network failures in 17 systems. The command relay in Sector 7741 is not responding. The Second Fleet flagship is... Another pause. I'm not getting a signal from the Second Fleet flagship. In the silence that followed, High Executor Veth Koral, who had governed an empire of 43,000 species for 300 years, who had been born into a civilization so powerful it had not experienced genuine military threat in 700 millennia, did something that no Vorthani leader had done in recorded history. She stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the layered ancient city of Vorth Prime gleamed in the light of its star, vast and permanent and absolutely certain of its own endurance. She thought about the species glyphs on the chamber wall. 43,000 of them. They were building, she said quietly to no one in particular. The entire time. 400 years. They were building. No one in the room answered her, because there was nothing to say. By 1800 hours on March 15, 2487, the Vorthani military had lost contact with 63% of its active fleet. By midnight, it was 81%. By Or 600 on March 16th, the Vorthani High Dominion Council, reduced to communicating through backup channels that ran through civilian infrastructure, because the military network was compromised, received a transmission from a human source. The transmission was video. It showed Admiral Yusra Chen seated at a plain table in what appeared to be the bridge of a human warship. She was not in ceremonial clothes. She was in her working uniform. She looked like she had been awake for 48 hours, which she had. Behind her, visible through the bridge viewport, were human ships, not 712 of them. Those were distributed across 17 star systems, but enough. Enough to be the unmistakable visual evidence of a fleet that existed and had been used and had achieved its purpose. Admiral Chen looked directly at the camera. High Executor Veth Koral, she said. My name is Admiral Yusra Chen. I command the United Earth Liberation Fleet. You don't have a file on me. You don't have a file on most of us. That was, if you'll forgive me saying so, a significant oversight. She paused. I want to be very clear about what has happened and what we are asking for, because clarity is important and we have not come this far to be misunderstood. She laced her fingers together on the table. In the last 36 hours, your military command structure in 17 star systems has been neutralized. We have not destroyed everything. We made deliberate choices about what to target and what to leave intact. We are not here to commit the kind of action that was committed against humanity 400 years ago. We are not here to file forms with Column C. We don't do that. What we have demonstrated, she continued, is that we can. We have a weapon that your systems cannot detect and cannot counter, and we have the fleet to deliver it at scale, and we have the will to use it as many times as necessary. But I want to be very precise. We are not asking for revenge. We considered it. I won't pretend we didn't. 400 years of what your dominion did to us, to our people, to our colonies, to the 43,000 other species you've done this to. The case for revenge is not a short case. She unfolded her hands. But we decided a long time ago. The people who started this, the ones who built everything that led to today, they decided we wanted something more than revenge. Revenge is a thing you do for the dead. We're doing something for the living. She leaned forward slightly. Here is what we are asking for. The immediate and unconditional release of all human populations from Dominion administrative control. The same release extended to all 43,000 absorbed species, on a timeline to be negotiated with their own representatives. The full dismantlement of the Dominion's military apparatus, and its replacement with a multilateral Security Council that includes representation from every species currently within your borders. A full accounting, every file, every record, every archive, of what the Dominion has done over 700,000 years, made publicly available, so that history can be what it actually was. She paused again. In exchange for this, we will not pursue the complete military destruction of the Vorthani state. Your civilian population is not our enemy. Your world, your culture, your people, those things can continue to exist. We are not Column C people. You have 72 hours to respond. Admiral Chen out. The transmission ended. In the council chamber on Vorth Prime, the surviving members of the High Dominion Council sat in silence for a very long time. It was the eldest council member, 900 years old, the one who had been in the room for Preveth Sol's report, who spoke first. They built in secret, he said, for 400 years, under our administration, under our monitoring, under 43 purges. He shook his head slowly. We never understood what they were. What were they? Someone asked. He was quiet. Patient, he said at last. They were patient in the way we are patient, but they were also something we are not. He thought about it. They were angry. For 400 years they were angry, and they used the anger to fuel the patience instead of the other way around. We have never encountered that. In 700,000 years we have never encountered a species that could do that. High Executor Veth Koral had not spoken since the transmission ended. Now she turned from the window where she had been standing. Prepare a response, she said. What response? Veth Koral looked at her hands. They were very old hands, steady with a millennium of experience, certain with 700,000 years of institutional backing. They did not feel that way today. Tell them, she said, that we accept their terms. Tell them we request a meeting. Tell them... She paused, looked up. Tell them that we have been wrong about them since the beginning. Tell them we understand that now. One of the aides hesitated. High Executor, that kind of statement in a formal communication, is accurate, Veth Koral said. Send it as written. The response from the Liberation Fleet came back in 40 minutes. It read, Terms accepted. Location for meeting to follow. Bring your full records. We'll need them to start. Admiral Y. Chen, ULF. On March 17, 2487, what history would call the Galactic Liberation began in earnest. It was not instant. None of the things that mattered were instant except the 9 seconds that made all the others possible. The meetings took months. The negotiations took years. The actual release of 43,000 species from Dominion administrative control took decades, because you cannot undo 700,000 years of deliberate dependency in an afternoon. It took patience, engineering, diplomacy, and a particular kind of sustained will that the Vorthani had never needed to develop and humanity had been forced to cultivate for 4 centuries. The Cascade Pulse was eventually shared, its specifications open to any species that wanted them, as a collective defensive technology, not a weapon of conquest, but a guarantee that no single power could ever again build the kind of dominance the Vorthani had achieved. The human ships returned to Earth, to Mars, to Europa, to the colonies, to the asteroid shipyards where 4 generations of people had built in secret. The workers who came out of those shipyards had never seen open sky. Some of them stood in the open air of a free Mars and did not know what to do with their hands. Admiral Yusra Chen lived to be 97 years old. She spent the last 20 years of her life doing something that, in a quieter era, she might have preferred: teaching. She taught at the newly established Academy of Galactic Relations on Earth, and she taught a class that became legendary, not for its tactics or its strategy, though those were covered, but for its first lecture. The first lecture was not about weapons or warships or the mechanics of the Cascade Pulse. It was about Commander Reyes, about a woman in a basement with 11 other people and a folding table and a list that began with the words, "What we need." About a generation of people who could not win and knew it and kept going anyway. About the patience, the fury, the stubborn, unkillable insistence of a species that refuses to be the end of its own story. We did not win because we were the strongest, Admiral Chen told her students every year for 20 years. For 3 of the 4 centuries before this, we were nowhere near the strongest. We were barely functional. We were a conquered species with no rights and no ships and no weapons and no realistic path to any of those things. She would pause here. Let the room sit with it. We won because we could not stop caring about it. That's the whole secret. Every other species, when faced with the impossible, eventually reaches a point where some part of them says, maybe this is just how it is. Humans never found that point. Humans kept going and going and going, and when we finally got to a place where we had a real weapon and a real fleet and a real chance, we also had 400 years of accumulated fury that had been carefully, deliberately, lovingly converted into precision. She would look around the room at that point, at the students, human and increasingly students from dozens of other liberated species, who had their own 400-year stories, their own basements, their own lists. The Vorthani had 700,000 years, she would say. We had 1 day, but we prepared for 4 centuries. And we brought the receipts. In the former council chamber on Vorth Prime, the 43,000 species glyphs are still on the wall. They were not removed. They are still lit dramatically, still arranged with the same curatorial care of the Vorthani aesthetic. But the chamber has been repurposed. It is now the meeting hall of the Galactic Assembly, the multilateral council that replaced the Dominion, where every species has representation and no single entity controls the vote. When the assembly was first convened, the human delegation made one request about the chamber, that the species glyphs remain. Because those civilizations deserve to be witnessed, they said. Their endings deserve to be remembered, not hidden. If this chamber is going to be the place where we decide how the galaxy is governed from now on, then it should look at what the last governing body did with its power, every day. So we never forget. The request was granted. The glyphs are still there, 43,000 of them. And at the head of the chamber, where the High Executor's dais used to be, there is now a plain table. Not ceremonial, not elevated. The same height as every other table in the room. On the day the first assembly session was held, someone, no one ever officially confirmed who, placed a handwritten note on the table. It read, "What we need." It was a list. A long one. The first item read, "Make sure this never happens again." And below it, in the same handwriting, the same hand that had been writing lists in basements and asteroid shipyards and hidden camps for 400 years. Steady as stone, certain as gravity. Patient as a species that knows it has forever but acts like everyday matters. We've got time. But we've got work to do. The Galactic Concord called it a mercy. That was the word they used in the official resolution, the one read aloud by the Concord High Speaker, before an assembled gallery of 412 species, broadcast on every relay network in the known galaxy, archived in every major civilization's public record, for the stated purpose of transparency and historical clarity. The word mercy appeared 3 times in the resolution's text, as if repetition could make it true. As if saying a thing kindly enough, with sufficiently careful language, could change what the thing actually was. What it actually was. The expulsion of humanity from the Galactic Concord, the revocation of Earth's diplomatic standing, the seizure of all human-operated infrastructure within Concord space, 12 relay stations, 41 mining installations, 2 research outposts, and the colony ship UES Providence, which was mid-voyage at the time, and whose 800 colonists were transferred to Concord custody before their vessel was impounded, and the declaration of a 500 light-year exclusion zone around the Sol system, inside which no Concord member species was permitted to trade, communicate, or establish any form of relationship with humanity. A quarantine, dressed in the language of mercy. The charge that justified it was conspiracy to destabilize the Concord political structure. A charge rooted in the fact that humanity, in its 14 years of Concord membership, had done something no species in 900 years of Concord history had done. It had made friends. Not diplomatic relationships, not trade partnerships sealed by committee, genuine friendships between individual humans and individual members of other species that had produced an informal network of goodwill and mutual support that the Concord's oldest power blocks had eventually recognized as something they could not control and had therefore decided to destroy. Admiral Sarah Chen had been in the Concord Gallery when the resolution was read. Not as a military officer. She had no military standing in the Concord chamber. The United Earth Navy was not permitted official representation in Concord proceedings. That was left to the diplomatic corps. She was there as an observer in the public gallery because she had requested observer access for the session, and it had been granted, because no one in the Concord bureaucracy had thought about why a senior military officer would want to observe a diplomatic session about human trade relations. She had sat in the gallery for 3 hours and 20 minutes and listened to 412 species representatives respond to the roll call with their vote, aye or nay on the expulsion resolution. 389 ayes, 23 nays. 0 abstentions because the Concord's rules on resolutions of this category did not permit abstention. You voted or you were counted as an aye by default, which was a procedural provision that Chen had noted, with a cold sort of attention, was very well designed for exactly this kind of majority action. The 23 nays had been, she would later learn, the species with whom individual humans had built individual friendships. The ones who had voted against, not because a committee told them to, but because someone they personally respected had looked them in the eye and asked them not to. 23 out of 412. When the High Speaker announced the resolution passed, the gallery had done something Chen had not expected. It had applauded. Not politely. Not with the restrained formal acknowledgement of a body that had executed a difficult but necessary administrative decision. It applauded the way an audience applauds when something they have been watching build for a long time finally resolves the way they wanted. With relief. With satisfaction. With an undercurrent of something Chen would spend the flight home trying to name and would eventually identify as pleasure. They had enjoyed it. They had wanted this. Chen sat in the gallery and did not move and did not speak and let the applause go through her the way cold water goes through you. Not painful, but clarifying. Stripping everything away until only the essential thing remained. The essential thing was this. The Galactic Concord, in its 900-year history, had never expelled a member species. It had issued censures, trade restrictions, diplomatic sanctions, the full toolkit of an institution that preferred administrative pressure to direct confrontation. But it had never expelled anyone. The Concord's entire identity was built on the premise of inclusion, of bringing civilizations together under a common framework, of the principle that the galaxy was better managed as a cooperative, except for humanity. Humanity got expelled, and the gallery applauded. Chen flew home on a transport that had been impounded twice and released only because it was carrying diplomatic personnel, and she sat in the back and thought about the 41 mining installations and the 12 relay stations and the 800 colonists in Concord custody and the 500 light-year exclusion zone that had just been placed around her species, like a fence around a dangerous animal. She thought about the 23 species that had voted no. She thought about the word mercy, used 3 times in a resolution that had just locked humanity in its room and thrown away the key. And she thought about what she was going to do about it. Not whether. What? She had been thinking about this since 2 months ago, when the intelligence reports had first suggested the expulsion was coming. Since the moment she had understood that diplomacy was not going to stop it because diplomacy was what they were using to do it. She had been building something in her mind for 2 months the way she built everything, quietly, completely, from first principles, until the shape of it was clear enough to begin. The transport hit the jump point. The stars blurred. And Admiral Sarah Chen, the most dangerous woman in a species that had just been thrown out of the galaxy, went home to start building an empire. The exclusion zone was a sentence. But it was also, Chen understood in the weeks after she returned to Earth, a gift. Not a comfortable gift. Not the kind you're grateful for immediately. The kind that costs you everything first and only reveals its value after you've paid the price. The exclusion zone meant no conquered trade, no access to the interstellar markets that humanity had been integrated into for 14 years, no conquered technology imports, no conquered communication infrastructure, no conquered shipping lanes, no conquered anything. It also meant no conquered oversight, no conquered regulations on what humanity could research, no conquered treaties limiting what humanity could build, no conquered inspectors, reviewers, approval committees, or bureaucratic gates. For 14 years, Earth's integration into the conquered had been contingent on compliance with a regulatory framework so extensive that it had, Chen had long believed, been deliberately designed to keep developing civilizations in a state of managed dependency. Every technology Earth wanted to advance required conquered approval. Every ship design had to be submitted for review. Every weapons system, even defensive ones, required a committee vote. It was framed as safety and stability. It functioned as a leash. The expulsion cut the leash. Chen walked into the emergency session of the United Earth Council 2 weeks after returning home. She sat at the witness table and she looked at the assembled leadership of every nation on the planet, and she said 5 words before any question was asked. They have done us a favor. The room's reaction was complicated. The President of the United States looked at her like a woman trying to determine whether the person in front of her was profoundly wise or had suffered some kind of break with reality. The European Council representative openly said, "Admiral, with respect, we've lost 14 years of economic integration and had 800 people taken from their ship. We've lost what they allowed us to have," Chen said, "which was always less than we were capable of. And we're going to get the 800 back, all of them. But not by asking politely." She looked around the table. "I need authority. I need budget. And I need everyone in this room to understand that what I'm going to propose is not a diplomatic strategy. It's a construction project, the largest in human history. And at the end of it, the Galactic Conquered is going to look at what we've built, and they're going to understand that the exclusion zone was the worst decision they ever made." She presented the plan for 6 hours. The Council approved it that evening. What followed was 18 months that Earth would later call the founding. 18 months that people who lived through them remembered not as a time of triumph, but as a time of absolute, relentless work that asked more of more people than anything in human history. The Conquered exclusion zone covered 500 light-years around Sol, but the Conquered's maps only extended so far. Beyond the edge of the Conquered's charted territory, in the regions the Conquered called the Deep Fringe, the systems too remote or too sparse to bother with, there was space. Unclaimed space. Space where the Concord's rules did not apply, because the Concord had never gotten around to caring about it. Chen called it the Void. She was going to build in it. The first expedition left Earth 14 months after the expulsion. 17 ships, 8,000 people, carrying the most concentrated collection of scientific, engineering, and industrial expertise ever assembled aboard a fleet that small. Their destination was a star system 63 light-years beyond the Concord's charted boundary, which Chen's navigation team had designated Outpost 1. The system had 4 planets, 2 of which were resource-rich, and 1 of which was marginally habitable with significant atmospheric modification work. It had no strategic value by Concord standards, too far from major lanes, too small for a significant colony. It had exactly what Chen needed, raw materials and no one watching. The second expedition 4 months later went in a different direction, Outpost 2. Then 3. Chen was not building one colony. She was building a network, a distributed infrastructure of human installations, spread across the void, each one outside Conquered space. Each one beyond the exclusion zone. Each one connected to the others by a relay communication system that the Conquered didn't know existed, because the Conquered had been built on the assumption that species outside the zone had no meaningful way to communicate over interstellar distances without using Conquered infrastructure. Humanity had spent the 14 months since expulsion building its own. Major Tom Duke Reeves, The same Reeves who had spent 2 years inside an asteroid for the Aegis project, who had subsequently been given a promotion and a new assignment, and who was now Colonel Reeves, heading the infrastructure division of Chen's expansion program, oversaw the relay network construction with the specific enthusiasm of a man who had spent 2 years underground and was extremely motivated by open space. His team laid relay nodes at 18 light-year intervals across 11 expansion vectors. Within 14 months of the first expedition, Chen could send a message from Earth to any outpost in the void and receive a reply in under 40 minutes. But the relay network was not the achievement that changed everything. The achievement that changed everything was the drive. Human FTL technology, at the time of expulsion, was functional but slow by Concord standards, a consequence of 14 years of being prevented from developing beyond the baseline level that the Concord permitted for developing civilizations. The maximum safe transit speed was approximately 3 light-years per day. Concord military vessels operated at 8. Concord Express couriers operated at 15. Dr. Emily Park, the same Park who had managed the Aegis grid systems, who had then taken a 2-year leave from Space Force to work with a private research consortium, and who had 3 months ago submitted a paper through Chen's classified research network that had caused every physicist who read it to call someone else and say, "You need to read this," had cracked the geometric torsion principle that Concord regulations had classified as a restricted technology for member species. The new drive did not operate at 3 light-years per day. It operated at 42. At 42 light-years per day, the 500 light-year exclusion zone was not a barrier. It was a 12-day trip. At 42 light-years per day, the entire Concord's charted territory, 12,000 light-years across, was accessible in under a year of continuous travel. At 42 light-years per day, humanity's exclusion from the Concorde space was a political fiction, because physics did not recognize the resolution of 412 species committees. Chen read Park's preliminary specifications and felt something she rarely felt: the specific quality of certainty that arrives not gradually but all at once, when a puzzle that has been incomplete for a long time suddenly has all its pieces. She called Park directly. "How long to full production capability?" she asked. "First fleet retrofit in 4 months, Park said. "Full fleet conversion in 12. "Retrofit the exploration ships first," Chen said. "I need them moving before the fleet." "What are the exploration ships looking for?" Park asked. Chen looked at the void map on her display, the expanding network of outposts, the relay lines, the 11 expansion vectors reaching outward from Sol into unclaimed space. "Allies," she said. "The Concorde excluded us. But the Concorde doesn't speak for the whole galaxy. There are species out there they never bothered to contact because they were too far away or too small or too inconvenient. We're going to find them." She paused. "We're going to find the 23. Park was quiet for a moment. "The 23 species that voted against the expulsion?" Park said. "They told us something important when they voted no," Chen said. "They told us they already knew us, already trusted us. The Concord never gave us credit for the network we'd built in 14 years of membership. They thought they were expelling a civilization. They actually expelled a diplomatic foundation." She looked at the map. "We're going to build on it." The first contact mission launched on a Tuesday, 4 months after Park's drive went into the exploration fleet. 42 light-years per day changed everything about first contact. In the Concord era, diplomatic missions traveled at Concord-permitted speeds through Concord shipping lanes, which meant they arrived when the Concord's infrastructure allowed, and were, implicitly, visible to everyone on the network. Contact was always public, always on the record, always subject to the kind of scrutiny that the Concorde exercised over every interaction between its member species and anyone else. The system was designed, Chen had come to believe, to make sure that no species built relationships the Concorde couldn't monitor and moderate. At 42 light-years per day on a ship that didn't use Concord lanes, a diplomatic mission arrived where it intended to arrive and was visible only to the people it was visiting. The first mission went to the Sarathi homeworld. The Sarathi were the insectoid species whose duty officer, Vel Than 3 years ago, had made the unauthorized call that had brought the Ares to the Varath colony. That act had resulted in Velthan being formally censured by the Concord, a censure that had been recorded in the Concord's public archive and which had, among certain species, become a quiet point of discussion about what the Concord's rules actually protected and who they actually protected it from. The Sarathi government had voted nay on the expulsion resolution. They had done it at professional cost. 3 of their diplomatic staff had been reassigned after the vote. Chen's mission arrived at Sarathi space unannounced, on a ship that the Sarathi censors classified as unknown design and unknown origin, until the crew broadcast their identification on standard frequencies. United Earth Republic diplomatic vessel. Request permission to meet. United Earth Republic. Not United Earth Navy, not Earth Delegation. United Earth Republic, the new name that the Council had adopted 4 months after the expulsion, because they had decided that if they were starting over, they were going to start with clarity about what they were building. Not just a planet, a republic, a governed civilization with a defined structure and a defined intention. The Sarathi government received the mission in the 3rd day after arrival. Chen led it personally. She sat across the table from 3 senior Sarathi officials, including a diplomat named Velthan, promoted, despite the censure, by a government that had apparently decided his judgment was sound regardless of what the Concord thought. And she said without preamble, "You voted no. I'm here because of that. I'm not here to ask you to do anything that costs you more than you've already paid. I'm here to offer you something." She slid a data package across the table. "That is the specification for a drive system that operates at 42 light-years per day. It is yours. Free. No conditions. No treaty required. You can build it yourself. You can tell no one. And we will never ask anything in return." She looked at them steadily. "That's the opening offer. There is no catch. What I want in exchange for nothing is for you to understand that humanity is not what the Concord said we were." Velthan looked at the data package. "Why?" he asked. "Why give us this with nothing in return?" "Because the Sarathi duty officer who called us 3 years ago saved 4 million lives, Chen said. "Because the 3 diplomats who were reassigned after your government voted no paid a price for doing the right thing. Because we believe in reciprocity." She met his eyes. "And because we're going to need friends who trust us before we need allies who owe us." The Sarathi government took 3 days to deliberate. They accepted. The 2nd contact mission went to the Varath. The 3rd went to the Oran, a small civilization of 6 systems near the Concord's inner fringe, who had voted nay and had subsequently been pressured by 3 larger member species to change their position for the next formal review. They hadn't changed it. They had instead quietly asked a Concord trade partner to pass along a message to any human they encountered, which was, "We're still no. Find us." Chen found them. Over the following 8 months, 7 contact missions visited 11 of the 23 species. The pattern was the same each time. Arrive unannounced, bring something of genuine value freely given, ask for nothing immediate except the chance to build a relationship. No pressure, no obligations, no treaty frameworks. Chen had spent 2 years in conquered diplomatic structures, and she understood, with the clarity of someone who had been managed by a system from the inside, how those structures worked. They bound people in obligation before they bound them in genuine connection. She was doing the opposite. Connection first, structure after. The results were extraordinary. By the time 8 months had passed, 7 species had accepted the drive specifications. 3 of them had independently asked, without prompting, whether there was a formal alliance framework they could join. Chen had said, "Not yet, but soon. Give us 6 more months." She needed 6 months because she needed the void to be ready first. Outpost 1 had grown from a 17-ship expedition to a functioning colony of 12,000 people, with full manufacturing capability, an orbital shipyard that had so far launched 31 vessels, and a defensive installation that the Concord's intelligence services, if they had known about it, would have found deeply alarming. Outposts 2 through 7 were at various stages of development behind 1. Outpost 8, the largest, positioned at the strategic junction of 3 expansion vectors, was under construction and would, when complete, be the largest artificial installation humanity had ever built. Chen called it the Nexus. And the Nexus was where she intended to hold the founding meeting of something that had never existed before in the history of the known galaxy. Not an alliance, not a coalition of convenience. Something with a name and a structure and a set of principles that had been written not by a committee of 412 species with competing interests, but by the people who had voted no when it would have been easier to vote yes. She called it the Free Worlds Compact. The meeting was 6 months away. She had 6 months to finish building the room. The Galactic Concord noticed something was wrong 14 months after the expulsion, not because of the void outposts. Those were beyond the edge of Concord surveyed space, and the Concord had no mechanism for detecting activity in regions it had never charted. Not because of the drive development. Dr. Park's work was conducted entirely within human space, inside the exclusion zone, and the Concord's surveillance of the exclusion zone was limited to the passive sensor sweeps that confirmed humanity was contained. They noticed because of the Sarathi. Specifically, they noticed because the Sarathi began acting differently. Less responsive to Concord administrative requests, slower to submit required filings, declining 2 invitations to Concord economic working groups. None of these were dramatic violations. The Sarathi were still full Concord members, still paying their assessments, still technically compliant. But the pattern was noticeable to someone paying close enough attention, and the Concord Senior Administrator for Interspecies Relations, a being called High Coordinator Vrethnal, who had been one of the principal architects of the expulsion resolution, and who had been watching humanity's exclusion with the satisfied attention of someone who had solved a problem, noticed. He ordered a full audit of every contact between the 23 nay-voting species and any known human entity over the past 14 months. The audit came back with a finding that Vrethnal had not expected. There were no such contacts on record, no communications through Concord relays, no ship identification records, no trade transactions, no diplomatic exchanges through any registered channel. Nothing, which was on its face the desired outcome. The exclusion zone was working, humanity was isolated. The nay-voting species were staying in line because they had no way to maintain contact with their human acquaintances. But Vrethnal was not a being who found absence of evidence reassuring. He had been in Concord administration for 60 years. He understood that absence of evidence in a comprehensive audit meant one of 2 things. Either the thing you were looking for wasn't happening, or it was happening in a way you couldn't see. He tasked a covert intelligence team to look harder. They found nothing. No human transmissions on any known frequency. No human ships on any registered lane. No human presence anywhere in the Concord's surveyed space. Which told Vrethnal exactly what he needed to know. Humans were communicating through channels that didn't exist in the Concord's registry. Humans were moving through space that wasn't on the Concord's maps. Humans were doing something in the dark, and whatever it was organized enough to be invisible. He called an emergency session of the Senior Administrative Council. The exclusion zone has not contained them, he said. It has accelerated them. The Council's response was to dispatch a survey fleet, 30 ships equipped with extended-range sensors, tasked with mapping the region beyond the Concord's charted territory in the direction the intelligence analysis suggested human activity was concentrated. The survey fleet departed on a Thursday. Chen knew about it by Friday, because the Sarathi, who had the drive specs for a 42 light-year per day ship, also had, as of 2 months ago, a covert intelligence sharing arrangement with the United Earth Republic's diplomatic network. Not a formal treaty, not anything on any record, just a working relationship between professionals who trusted each other. And the Sarathi had a source inside the Concord administrative apparatus who had flagged the survey fleet dispatch within hours. Chen was at Outpost 5 when the intelligence arrived. She was there overseeing the final construction phase of the Nexus, specifically the Great Hall where the founding meeting of the Free Worlds Compact would take place in 6 weeks. The hall was large enough to seat representatives of 40 civilizations, which was an optimistic target count that Chen had set, knowing that 23 was the guaranteed minimum and believing that the other 22 would come when they saw who else was attending. She read the intelligence report. She looked at the construction timeline. 6 weeks, she said to Colonel Reeves, who was beside her on the construction deck. The survey fleet will reach the outer boundary of our outpost network in approximately 4 weeks at standard Concord survey speeds, Reeves said. He had already done the math because that was what Reeves did. They'll find 1, 2, and 3 before the meeting date. Can we accelerate the meeting? We can hold it in 4 weeks if the hall is the only thing not finished. He paused. I can have the seats in by then. The ceremonial trim can wait. The trim can wait. Chen agreed. She thought for a moment. When the survey fleet finds the outposts, she said, what do they see? 7 functioning human installations independent of conquered infrastructure, operating well beyond the exclusion zone boundary, Reeves said. Plus relay network infrastructure. Plus 31 ships of unregistered design based out of the Outpost 1 shipyard. Unregistered because they're new designs, Chen said. Designs we didn't need Concord approval for because we're not in the Concord. Yes. Good. She looked at the hall frame being assembled around them. Let them find it, I want them to find it. She turned to Reeves. Send word to all our contact species. Advance the meeting by 2 weeks. New date, 21 days. Tell them the reason. She paused. Tell them the Concord is coming to look at what we've built. I want them to be here when it arrives. You want the Concord survey fleet to arrive and find a founding meeting of a new interstellar organization in progress? Reeves said. I want them to arrive and find the meeting already done, Chen said. The compact already signed. The member species already committed, so that when Brethnall reads the survey report he doesn't see a human construction project, he sees a fait accompli. She went back to watching the construction. The hall seats 40, Reeves said. Do you think 23 will actually come? 23 will come, Chen said. And when they see the hall seats 40, some of them are going to ask who fills the other 17 seats. She allowed herself a small smile. That's a question I want people asking. 26 species came, not 23, 26. 3 species that had voted aye on the expulsion, not nay voters. Actual aye voters who had gone along with the majority 14 months ago, and who had spent 14 months watching the Concord's behavior toward the nay-voting species and had drawn their own conclusions. Had made private contact through intermediaries in the weeks leading up to the meeting, asking if attendance was open or invitation only. Chen had said, open. Always open. The meeting is for anyone who believes in what we're building. She had not expected 3 aye voters. She had hoped, but she had not expected. The founding meeting of the Free Worlds Compact convened at the Nexus on a Tuesday morning, Nexus time, which ran on Earth's calendar because Earth had built the station and Earth's habits die hard, with representatives of 26 species seated in a hall that was structurally complete, but whose ceremonial trim had not been installed, and whose bare metal walls were, Chen thought, more honest than marble would have been. This was not a ceremony of established power. This was the beginning of something. It should look like a beginning. Chen spoke first. She had written the opening herself, rewritten it 6 times and then thrown out all 6 versions and spoken from the principles underneath them. 14 months ago, she said, the Galactic Concord told 26 civilizations, in various ways through various mechanisms, that their voices were less important than administrative convenience. They told 12 of you that your vote had professional consequences. They told 3 of your governments that their diplomatic positions would be reviewed for inconvenient alignment. They told humanity to sit in a room by ourselves and be grateful for the mercy. She looked around the hall. We did not sit in the room, she said. We built a new one, and we invited everyone who understood why the old room needed replacing. The Compact's founding document had been drafted over 3 months by a team of 29 human diplomats, legal scholars, and political architects, reviewed and amended by representatives of 11 species during the contact phase, and was, by the time it was read into the record at the Nexus meeting, a document that said, with the careful precision of people who had studied what the Concord's founding document said and where they had been weaponized, members of the Free Worlds Compact maintained absolute sovereignty over their own territory, resources, and governance. The Compact provided a framework for trade, mutual defense, communication, and technological exchange that was entirely voluntary and entirely transparent. No species could be expelled. No vote could be held on the standing of any member. The only exit from the Compact was voluntary withdrawal, and it began, unlike the Concord's document, not with a preamble about stability and order, but with a single sentence. The Free Worlds Compact exists because the right to exist freely cannot be conditional. 26 signatures. The Concorde's survey fleet arrived at Outpost 3 6 days after the signing. The survey commander, a career officer following his orders, had been expecting to find a human construction project in an uncharted region. He had been expecting, at most, a series of mining and industrial outposts, possibly some relay infrastructure, a collection of ships that the intelligence estimate had suggested were militarily significant, but manageable. He had not been expecting the message that was waiting for him at Outpost 3, cued to transmit automatically on standard Concorde frequencies upon detection of a conquered ship in range. It was from Admiral Sarah Chen, sent from the Nexus station 14 days earlier. It read, "Commander, you are currently standing outside the territory of the Free Worlds Compact. The installation you are surveying is a member installation of the Compact, operating under the sovereignty of its founding treaty. Your presence at this location is not a violation. You are in unclaimed space and you are welcome to observe. I would like, however, to formally notify the Galactic Concorde of the following. 1. The Free Worlds Compact was founded 21 days ago with 26 member civilizations, 11 of which are current Galactic Concorde members. By the terms of the Compact's founding treaty, their Compact membership does not conflict with or supersede their Concorde membership. They remain members of both. The Concorde is free to draw whatever conclusions it wishes from this fact. 2. The Free Worlds Compact's territory currently encompasses 43 installations across the void, the unclaimed regions beyond Concorde charted space, plus the sovereign territory of 11 member civilizations within Concorde space. This territory will continue to expand as new outposts are established and new members join. 3. The Free Worlds Compact extends an open offer to any Galactic Concorde member species that wishes to add Compact membership to their existing Concorde standing. There are no political requirements, no loyalty oaths, and no conditions. The door is open. 4. The 800 colonists from the UES Providence who have been held in Concorde custody for 14 months are citizens of the United Earth Republic and members of the Free Worlds Compact. We formally request their return. This is the first of 3 formal requests. If 3 formal requests do not produce a response, we will make other arrangements. The survey commander read the message twice. He composed a response acknowledging receipt and transmitted it back to Concorde Central. Then he stood on his bridge and looked at the installation in front of him. The functioning colony, the orbital shipyard, the ships of a design he had never seen before. And he thought about what High Coordinator Vrethnal was going to say when this message arrived. He was glad he was going to be 4 weeks away when it did. The Concorde's response to Chen's message took 6 weeks, not because deliberation took that long. The deliberation, by all accounts from the intelligence sources the Compact now maintained inside the Concorde structure, was fast. Within 48 hours of the survey report arriving, Vrethnal's faction was already preparing a position. The 6 weeks were the Concorde being the Concorde. Process, review, committee, subcommittee, formal acknowledgement of receipt, drafting of a response, review of the draft, amendment, review of the amendment, and finally, on a Thursday because things in this story happen on Thursdays and Tuesdays, and the calendar does not care about historical significance, a formal reply. The reply said, in the careful language of an institution that had been doing this for 900 years and was very practiced at saying things that sounded like concessions while not being concessions. The Galactic Concorde acknowledges the formation of the Free Worlds Compact and notes with interest the participation of current Concorde member species in its founding. The Concorde reaffirms the right of all member species to engage in voluntary cooperative frameworks outside Concorde administrative jurisdiction, subject to the terms of their existing membership agreements. The Concorde further notes that the situation of the UES Providence colonists is under administrative review and that a resolution is expected within the standard review period. Standard review period was 6 months. Chen read the reply. She set it down. She thought about the gallery applauding. She sent back 3 sentences. Thank you for your acknowledgement. The standard review period is not acceptable. The colonists come home in 30 days or we make other arrangements. This is the second formal request. The Concord escalated to a diplomatic session. A formal meeting attended by 3 senior Concord officials with Chen and 2 UER diplomats, held at a neutral station in the outer fringe. It lasted 4 hours. The Concord argued procedure. Chen argued people. When the Concord representative suggested that the situation was more complex than a simple custody question, Chen put 3 things on the table: the drive specifications, a full technical briefing on the compact's 43 void installations, and a preliminary roster of the 11 Concord member species, who were now also compact members. Not as threats, as information. I want you to understand what exists, she said. Not as a negotiating position, as a factual briefing. This is what has been built in the space your exclusion zone gave us to build it. The drive, the network, the compact. She looked at the 3 Concord officials. You expelled us to make us go away. We didn't go away. We went further. She paused. In another 18 months, if current expansion rates hold, the Free Worlds Compact will have more member species than the Galactic Concord had when it was founded 900 years ago. In 3 years, with current outpost development, our industrial capacity will exceed Earth's pre-expulsion Concord capped output by a factor of 12. She looked at each of them in turn. We are not asking you to recognize us out of necessity. We don't need your recognition. We are offering you the opportunity to have a relationship with us before the question of what kind of relationship to have becomes significantly more complicated. The colonists came home in 19 days, not 30, 19. The Concord released them 4 days after the meeting, before the 30-day deadline, without a formal announcement, just a quiet administrative transfer. The Providence's colonists boarded on a civilian transport and delivered to UER custody at the exclusion zone boundary. 800 people. 800 people who had been in Concord custody for 15 months, who came off the transport into the UER reception facility on the edge of human space, blinking in light that wasn't Concord managed, breathing recycled air that wasn't Concord monitored. Chen was there when they arrived. She had made the trip from the Nexus personally, 4 days each way at 42 light-years per day, which still astonished her every time she did the math, because some things you had to be present for. She stood in the reception bay and watched 800 people come through the transfer hatch. Families, children who had been 3 years old when the Providence was seized and were now almost 5. Engineers and scientists and colonists who had signed up to build something new and had spent 15 months in administrative limbo instead. They came through confused, cautious, carrying the specific wariness of people who had been in someone else's custody long enough to stop trusting quickly. A woman came through with a 4-year-old on her hip. The child looked at the reception bay, the UER banners, the Earth flag, the faces that weren't Concord uniform faces, and said something to her mother in a voice too low to hear across the bay. The mother looked up. She was looking for something. She found Chen's face. She held Chen's eyes for a moment. She mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Chen nodded. She stayed until the last person came through. On the transport back to the Nexus, Colonel Reeves brought her the latest compact expansion numbers. 3 new outpost certifications. 2 more contact missions successfully completed. Membership applications from 4 species currently under internal deliberation. Not the 23, not the original group, but new species. Species that had heard about the compact through second- and third-hand channels and had sent quiet inquiries through whatever routes they could find. 47 potential member species at current count. The Galactic Concord had 52 founding members at its formation, 900 years ago. Reeves, Chen said, not looking up from the data. Admiral. At current expansion rate. When do we hit 52 member species? He checked his projection. 14 months, he said. Chen set down the data tablet. She looked at the viewport, the dark between stars, the void that had been a sentence and had become a foundation, and she thought about the gallery that had applauded. About the word mercy, used 3 times. About the transport home from the Concord chamber, the moment when she had decided what not whether. She thought about what the Conquered had intended to build: a quarantine, a fence, a demonstration that a small, young civilization could be contained and forgotten if the right procedures were followed. She thought about what they had actually built. "Get some sleep, Duke," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Reeves said. He didn't move immediately. He was looking at the same viewport, the same dark. "Do you think they understand yet? The Conquered? Do they understand what they made possible when they threw us out?" Chen thought about it. "They will," she said. "In about 14 months. She picked up the data tablet. Outside the viewport, the stars moved past. Not slowly, not at the pace of a species that had been told what speed it was permitted to travel. Fast. At 42 light years per day. At the speed of a civilization that had stopped asking permission. 14 months. The largest empire in history would not call itself an empire. Chen had been specific about that in the Compact's founding language. No emperor, no emperor's titles, no hierarchy that placed one civilization above another. They were a compact of equals, of free worlds, of species that had found each other in the dark. But the galaxy was going to look at what they built, and they were going to have to find a word for it. And whatever word they chose, it was going to mean, do not try to banish these people again. They know what to do with the dark.